worst job you've ever had? Story 1. I sprinkled mud onto potatoes that had already been washed so that they would look freshly dug when they hit the supermarket. Most depressing holiday job I've had. Edit, I woke up to gold. Thank you, kind stranger. I feel like the weeks of mind-numbing boredom were worth it now. I really wish I could provide you all with proof, but it was a few years back and we weren't allowed to take pics. Not that me by a mud sprinkling rack would have made a particularly thrilling scene. Story 2. Dancing bear. I was a waiter at a kid's restaurant, which had a bear as its mascot. The new guy had to be the bear on their first day, which meant putting on a massive bear costume over our waiter's uniform, including a huge fur head that you could barely see out of. You were then led around the place to wave at the parents and play with the kids. Once per hour, if you spoke, you were fired, as some of these kids were return customers who would recognize a waiter's voice. Wanting to impress my boss, I really hammed it up. I danced, I gestured, I goofed around, I sat on a mother's lap. I ruffled a father's hair while he growled, "Get off me, or I'll stab you." The boss loved it so much that he made me be the bear every day I worked there, which would be great, except it was August and so hot that the restaurant's aircon broke. The bear's suit hadn't been washed in the history of the restaurant, so served as a memorial to the sweat of 100 fallen waiters. Little kids would run head first at the bear and headbutt my testicles with depressing regularity. And all it earned me was the disgust of my wait team, who thought I was goofing off work by being the bear, since it was clearly easier than carrying 2 plates of reheated lasagna across the room and refilling drinks. Story 3. I worked at a slaughterhouse for a little while. They killed steers there, but got shipped in. The hams came in a gigantic cardboard vat, probably 5 wide and 4 deep. They were heavily waxed on the inside to make them waterproof, and had steel banding running around the outside kinned off like an old keg or barrel. Once we fished out most of the hams and trimmed them, there was always a couple feet of blood at the bottom. As the new guy, it was my job to dangle over the edge with a meat hook in one hand, fishing for the remaining hams and scraps. Usually it was about an hour in shoulder-deep blood with your face next to the surface. Story 4. Worked in a granite quarry. It was on Earth. You know, in the old black and white movies where the prisoners were punished by making big rocks into smaller rocks with a 12-pound sledgehammer. That's sort of what I did for a living. Some parts of it were bearable, especially when I got to blow up with primer cord. Touching your wires to the crane battery's positive and negative post, and feeling the ground leap underfoot as you separate 40 tons of granite from the earth is awesome. I just had to be careful and stay under the crane as debris from the explosion rains down. That was it, however. It was generally 120 in the hold during summer and seemed to always be below freezing in the winter. Swinging a sledgehammer hundreds of times in these conditions is brutal. The only people that the hard physical didn't faze was my Mexican and Guatemalan coworkers. These dudes were superhuman. The heat didn't bother them. They would be wearing long sleeves in June when the temp dipped into the 80s. They were friggin' chilly. Also, that lazy Mexican trope is so much bullshit. I had to make them give me the hammer when it was my turn to pound in the wedges and the foot spikes. Otherwise, they would keep the sledgehammer and start down the line again. Any normal man would be physically exhausted from swinging the sledgehammer dozens of times. Not my immigrant coworkers, they were beasts that go for the jackhammer too. I laugh when I see one person running one on TV. It takes 2 people to run the monsters, at least ours did. Enter the Mexican and Guatemalan supermen. I would turn my back for 1 minute, then feel the vibrations in the ground that you can feel when the jackhammer is, well, jacking. Turn around, and there would be an immigrant running it by himself, defying the law of physics. When I later found out they send upwards of 80 or more of their check back home to their families, my admiration grew. That was over 25 years ago. Much respect for these men. For me, however, I was in Story 5. Internship at a public relations firm in college. Was promised agency experience, writing opportunities, and valuable experience. Turns out what they actually meant was sitting in a room for 8 hours cold calling CEOs from an outdated call list and trying to trick them into a sales presentation. Might I add, about a month into the job, they hired a new intern manager who was the epitome of Massachusetts trash. Drove to work every day from the Cape on his Harley 2 hours one way. Lauded his degree from Bunker Hill Community College, chain-smoked, and DJ'd on the side at trash North Shore nightclubs. He insisted on sitting in the room with us for 8 hours to check if we were actually making calls, all while berating us for being poor employees and cheap labor. On my last day of the internship, he called me in his office and told me the only reason you're still here is because we didn't have to pay you. You'll never be successful like me. You're not cut out for the business world. If I were you, I would drop out and try to find a trade you'll succeed in. Even as a 19-year-old, I knew an idiot when I saw one. I looked him square in the eye and said, "You can go yourself," and walked out with the other interns. He then wrote a letter of complaint to my school to try and have my internship credit revoked, but luckily my advisor knew the situation and cut him out. Dan the DJ. If you're reading this, I want you to know I took your advice and did my best to never become you. Story 6: Hotel Housekeeping. If it comes out of the human body, I've cleaned it up. I started in a by-the-hour motel when I was 14, owned by a woman who didn't bother with hazardous waste procedure and cleaned up what looked like a murder scene with nothing but bleach and kitchen gloves. I walked into that room and was absolutely positive that when I pulled the shower curtain open, there was going to be a body in the bathtub. Thankfully, there wasn't, just blood everywhere. Owner refused to let me report it, made me clean it, and I didn't want to get in for bleaching a murder scene at 14, so I never did call the cops. Story 7: I've had jobs, but nothing compares to this guy that called into a radio contest for worst job titles, as his was chicken butthole remover. He stood on a slaughter line and made sure the carcasses were butthole free. If they weren't, he was to fix it. Story 8: Dealer in a casino. You learn a lot about different games and get to play cards all shift. You also make some pretty good coin with tips and whatnot. However, you get to meet some of the worst people on the planet. When people start losing money at your table, several hundred to several thousand at a time. Suddenly, that fun atmosphere becomes soul-suckingly tense, to the point that you better hope you're not walking alone when you're off tonight, but you get to call your pit boss over and say this patron just threatened me, boom, booted out of the casino, banned for 6 months to a year, and possibility of criminal charges. Sometimes, I got a nice justice working there. TLDR, I wouldn't recommend working at a casino as a dealer. It's definitely not for everyone. However, if you're a student and want to make some good money, it's a good job, but it comes with a price. I'm sure some other dealers will agree. Edit this blew up. Anyone who's thinking of being a dealer, it's definitely not for everyone. If you ever wanted to work wonders for your confidence and have the ability to become a stone when it comes to people being absolute heads to you, I suggest it. I think back to what skills I've gained from my time dealing. I've learned to be grateful, and when I have a day, I remind myself that I'm not dealing anymore. People who get bitchy, angry, or shitty towards me. It doesn't bother me anymore because I've dealt, no pun intended, with the worst. If you're a student and can handle taking a lot of, or want to learn how to handle taking a lot of, try being a dealer. You make great money. At the cost of your social life, you generally work nights and all through the weekend. One of the things I didn't really mention, but it's implied, when people are giving you at your table, you have to stand there and take it. You don't have the option to walk away. Hopefully your pit bosses are good enough to have your back. I'm contradicting myself from my original post, but this is for the ones who are the fence. It'll tell you the good and ill you the bad, mostly the bad, because there certainly wasn't a whole lot of good coming out of there. Story 9: Cutting fancy glass for use in mosaics. A glass cutter is basically a pen, with a small metal wheel on one end and a metal ball on the other. Fancy glass is thick, heavy, expensive, and sharp. The weight, thickness, and texture changes drastically. One may be a 3-centimeter smooth green glass sheet. The next may be a textured 5-centimeter piece of orange. There is no training. Glass dust is a thing. My fingertips were swollen with tiny shards of glass, and I broke much more glass than I was worth. It was a short gig. Story 10: Door-to-door solar panel salesman for a corrupt home energy company. Nothing better than knocking on someone's front door right in the middle of a Patriots game. Story 11: I worked in an office, entry-level job after a career switch. My boss was a crazy woman, never happy, never satisfied, always changing her mind and blaming everyone else. One day, she called me in her office and she gave me 2 projects and got mad when I was asked her questions about how she wanted them. At the end of the meeting, I asked her which one of these 2 you need first. Her both. I thought she misunderstood my question, so I repeated which one of these 2 you need first. Her both. No, really, which one of these 2 you need first. Her. At this point, she was yelling both. A few months later, I had enough of her, and I went to HR to complain about her treatment of the staff. Of course, she had a friend in the HR department, and she got wind of it. She called me in her office, and she complained to me about me complaining about her. And she told me, "You don't complain here. You leave." That was my clue. I called my headhunter and found myself a new, better job with better pay. A few years later, after I had built my career and I was actually ahead of her in responsibility and position, I met her at a conference, and she was giving false praise how I was one of the best workers she ever had, and then rhetorically asked me why I left in front of people. I told her that I had to thank her for my career since she was the one who suggested I left by telling me, "You don't complain here. You leave." She really didn't like that, LOL. Story 12: I collected semen from chickens for artificial insemination. You have them off, not my job. Walk into the room, and the scares immediately begin to ejaculate. We had to rush them and get the collection vial in place quickly, or the day's worth of semen was lost. So much semen on my gloves, ugh. Edit step-by-step instructions for disbelievers and the curious. Story 13: Currently in retail sales, and it is soul-sucking. If I didn't know I was leaving soon, I don't think I'd even be able to get out of bed in the morning. Story 14, I actually didn't take the job, but it would have been the worst by far. I applied for a position in an industrial bakery as a sanitation technician. As advertised, the job would entail disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling equipment. But when I showed up for my interview, really an informal orientation, a nice lady told me I would actually be standing at one end of the conveyor belt and given one simple task to pick up trays of bread coming off the conveyor belt, rotate them 90 degrees, and place them on a different conveyor belt for the entire duration of my 12-hour overnight shift. It would have nearly doubled my pay, but I just could not do it. I put my little hat back on and went back to rolling burritos. Even in the darkest, most horrible open-to-close days of my time at the burrito restaurant, I would console myself with the thought of that job and how much worse things could be. Edit TL, I don't know what a pallet is. Story 15, being poor means being willing to do up things for tiny bits of money. So I've had more sucky jobs than I can count, but the one that stands out to me most is door-to-door political fundraising canvassing. This was back in the early 90s. The way it worked was you had a clipboard, a pen, a petition, and some envelopes. The whole crew would meet at the office and then pile into the 15-passenger vans. The supervisors would drive us out to a territory turf anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours away from the office. Then they would divide us into pairs and give each pair of canvassers a map marked with the pair's assigned turf. IRC, we started knocking on doors around 300 or 400 p.m. and kept at it until 800. In that time, we were supposed to knock on people's doors and talk to them about whatever issue we were working on at that point. When I did my brief stint, it was nursing home reform legislation. Then, we were supposed to get the occupant to sign our petition and make a contribution, preferably check or charge on the spot. Our nightly quota was 120. If you think that people hate having telemarketers call their houses at dinner time to ask them for money, just imagine how much they love it when those same telemarketers show up unannounced on their front doorsteps. Between shitty weather, vicious dogs, crackheads, and tweakers answering the door, people's pervasive hatred of trespassers and solicitors, and constant fear of being fired for missing my quota, field canvassing was definitely one of the worst jobs I've ever had. Story 16, picking mangoes in Australia. Many people are unaware that if you snap off the stalk on a mango, poisonous sap flies out, which makes you blister quite dramatically. Also the best job because of the beautiful scenery. Story 17, I was a martial arts instructor in high school. I trained starting as very young, so I had my black belt at 13, am a female, and the disrespect men in martial arts have for women is nothing compared to the other women give you. Working with the kids was great, but coworkers was edit autocorrect is meh. Story 18, Pizza Hut inside Target. I hated cooking chicken tenders because the oven is specifically made for pizzas, pasta, and breadsticks. You have to put the chicken tenders one full time through, then one half time, about 11-minute total. It's 7 minutes for one pass through the oven, and even then it's still not guaranteed to be warm enough. Well, one of my first few weeks there, a customer asked for chicken tenders. I had practiced enough, so I informed the customer about the oven and time it takes to cook, and that it may be cold when finished, and to let me know if it is, and it'll warm them up. I gave customer the tenders. He sat down for a minute and came back and told me they were cold. I apologized and ran the chicken through the oven again, gave back the customer the food, and apologized again. After 10 minutes, and he was finished, he came back and complained they were cold and asked for a refund. I was really upset at this point because I thought I was being upfront, honest, and polite with him. They said something like you should be trained better and left after I refunded him. I only stayed there for 4 months, glad I got out. And I forgot the best part, my last day of work, I had a full 8-hour shift. Halfway through the day, management asks if I can stay for the next shift 4 hours because the next person called out, so they wanted me to work a full 12 hours on my last day. No, I declined because I realized my new job ID, be starting, would make up a whole paycheck in a day. Edit 2, someone asked for more stories. I think I can think of a couple more. A coworker of mine told me her story where she was serving a mother and her daughter. She asked for a pizza and no drink. We're trained to ask if you want to drink with your food. So, of course, my coworker asked if the mother wanted a drink. The mother said she didn't. After being rung up and given the food, the mother proceeds to stand there awkwardly. My coworker asked if she needed any help, and the mother, of course, demands where her drink was. My coworker, confused, explained she didn't pay for one, and the mother gave her and yelled at her for forgetting. I don't remember if she paid for it or got it for free, but after leaving satisfied, the mother turned to her daughter and said, "See, that's why you go to college." And lastly, they'll have to make this very vague because it might give away names. When I first started working, I met a coworker who was extremely nice, but came off as creepy. He hit on the girls a lot, but when bringing it up with anyone, it was always brushed off as he was just extremely nice. I didn't really get that vibe from him, but whatever. Anyways, after I left, I heard that he was arrested. Turns out he had some child on his computer. Remember to trust your gut, guys. 500s at Toys R Us. Essentially, what our job description entailed was to manage big-ticket items out back, unload trucks of inventory, and put away, etc. Even though that is the description, we used to call it 500s because you would do all 500 other possible jobs in the store. They would have us cover for cash, work the floor, clean like a janitor, straighten up the products on the shelves, answer phone calls. The list goes on. It was such a tiring job that by the end of a longer shift, you would just want to collapse. Story 19 managed a local restaurant, worked 10 to 12-hour days, often with closing and leaving at 1 a.m. only to be back to open at 8 a.m., 6 days a week with an 8 a.m. meeting on my only one full day off. Story 20, my first job as a legal secretary. I worked for a blowhard, rude, obnoxious, disgusting lawyer. Yeah, I know, insert lawyer jokes here. It was a small town, 3-lawyer firm with a 6-person support staff. The owner of the firm would regularly lose his cool, scream at and berate the staff, and fire people in a tyrannical rage for next to nothing. I worked there about 2 years and saw no less than 20 people get fired by this guy. The support staff stuck together and was mostly a good group of people, well, except for the woman who broke into her ex's girlfriend's house and disemboweled her with a tent stake. But that's a whole nother story. I finally fell victim to this guy's rage when I couldn't find the address to deliver a package, which I was doing as a favor to his personal secretary because she was having a near breakdown trying to meet a deadline before he left on a business trip. Sued for unemployment. He fought it tooth and nail, and I won. Story 21, working at a music store, rather, instruments. All day, there's at least one guy who is playing his first concert for everyone in the store. He has the most expensive guitar hooked up to the loudest amp while he sausage fingers through the intro to Sweet Child O' Mine. At the counter is a customer upset because the electric guitar he just purchased exploded when he plugged the 14 jack in the wall socket in his living room. This actually happened. In the drum room, there's a group of teenagers doing their best to play a blast beat they heard Pickles talk about in a Metalocalypse rerun. At the counter, there is a drummer for a church band that is placing an order for an 18-deep snare drum shell. The keyboard area has a mentally challenged kid doing his best Wesley Willis impression by using the play, a long function of a shitty Casio keyboard. His parents think it's great. The older jazz pianist is dissatisfied with the new electronic keyboards because they don't sound like my Steinway. At the counter is an aspiring producer trying to convince the salesman to teach him to use the software since he can't refund it now that it's registered to his iLock key. In the DJ room, there's one kid who thinks he's deadmau5 by literally just playing a deadmau5 CD. There's another kid who's asking for a record needle and demo vinyl, so he can try scratching. Record needles are about 60 to 120 each. So no, none of them have any idea what a DJ mixer is. In the pro audio area, there's an old guy who did some roadie work in the 80s, and he's arguing with a salesman over the price being higher than what it was 35 years ago. There's another customer looking to buy sound reinforcement for his church, but he's haggling over getting a better price for Jesus despite the fact that he already won't be paying tax on the items. At the counter is a man angry that the microphone he bought doesn't work without a cable or a speaker to plug it into. This actually happened. Then there's the people buying sheet music and hardware for their orchestral instruments. They're generally pretty chill, if a little weird. Usually they just want reads. Story 22, worked for UMG straight out of high school processing CD orders. It was still a thing back then. I was 17, the only guy in the office, working with nothing but 40-year-old women. Sweet Jesus, the raunchiest conversations that led me to discover the definition of TMI. The work was fine, just data entry, and they had a massive backlog when I arrived. In the first week, I cleared it all out, and no one in the office had anything to do, including myself. I couldn't browse the web. I brought a book into the office and was reading it, got yelled at by my supervisor for it. I explained that I had nothing to do, and sitting around staring at nothing for 8 hours a day was torture. What about our backlog? It's gone. It can't be true. Well, go check for yourself. Comes back, well, okay, if you have nothing to do, come talk to me. After a week of coming to her every hour on the hour asking for something to do, and her saying she had nothing, she yelled at me again for bugging her. They eventually fired me for refusing to come in 10 minutes prior to my scheduled time, unpaid, and logging into the phones. There was nothing going on, and I sure as was not going to sit around doing nothing for one more minute. Then I had to, much less unpaid. Close second was many years later, I was brought in to package software for a company that had bought another company, get it up to their standards, make sure it installed silently, etc. They didn't have a place for me to sit, so they put me in an unheated warehouse in a winter with massive bay doors that opened up 4 to 6 times a day for deliveries. After working there for a month, I still didn't even have a computer to work on. After a month, I got a computer, but there was nothing for me to do still. It took me a week to track down my manager after this point, and he said that they wouldn't have work for me for a few more months. Aren't you lucky? You get to do nothing and collect a paycheck. He said to me, Yeah, real lucky. Then they brought on another guy for some reason to do the same job. We were both incredibly confused, to say the least. After another month, and having read about 24 books, I just stopped showing up, submitted my time, and checked my email every day to see if there was any work to do, as well as sent weekly emails asking if there were any tasks coming my way soon to my manager. Finally, after 2 months, they caught on and let me go. I didn't feel bad about it in the slightest. Story 23, I was a furnace helper in steel factory. We made bumper mounts and hinges for trucks' hoods and other heavy steel parts. I unloaded red-hot parts from the furnace with a pair of tongs. I used to catch fire 2 or 3 times a day. I hated that. Story 24, it had the possibility of the greatest job I've ever had, except I had the worst boss you could possibly think of. I worked at Viacom parent of MTV, Nick Bed, etc. My salary was incredible. I was a designer. My boss, though, made every single day a living. The woman proceeded to berate me every single day, kept me working hours past the time I was scheduled to leave, and told me if I left before she said I can all be fired. This was a daily occurrence. I was paid weekly and every week because I was on an hourly basis. When I submitted my timesheet, she made me redo it to lessen the amount of hours I worked because she claimed I could have finished the work in less time than I did. This was actually impossible. I finished as fast as the job could be finished, and so if I worked 50 hours in a week, I would only be paid for 40. Again, threatened with being fired if I tried anything. When she was mad at me, she physically poked me hard, basically assaulting me. Finally, I'm an adult, and she actually brought me to tears one time due to her basically telling me how stupid I am that I can't follow directions, where in fact she was impossibly stupid at explaining herself correctly, and any attempt at telling her this would just lead to her becoming so much stupider. She also had a mindset that at any hour of the day, if she called me, I should answer and help her out with whatever she needed. This meant if she was on a business trip and she called me at 3 in the morning, that I should get out of bed and go to my computer to help her with the designing, her rationale, because she was my boss. Yes, I went to HR about her, and because she was so manipulative, even though I had recordings of her, they weren't secret. She knew I was recording, and she gave me permission. She was able to get out of any trouble with HR other than a simple slap on the wrist, because she basically called me stupid. I didn't get in trouble with HR for going, but later in that day, she pulled me in her office and yelled at me for bringing HR into the mix rather than just talk to her directly, because in her words, she's not an ogre that I can't come to talk to about something she did. Story 25, student teaching. Put me right out of the business. I see why so many new teachers break so quickly. Parents, kids, endless paperwork, worthless administration, and never any respite. Story 26, help desk for a mortgage company. It started out as a basic IT job where I would only fix legitimate system issues, which I enjoyed as much as one can enjoy work. But for some reason, it mutated into a job where I would help people who didn't know how to do anything they asked. This included things like calculating payments, reading credit reports, and tons of basic underwriting stuff. Whenever I would push back and try saying this wasn't what our department does, the idiots would cry about it to my boss. I was supposed to be the manager, but I had no real authority. It was just a meaningless title, and it would become something we do. Story 27, I was the fat man in a ham processing plant. My job was to take the fat that the deboners and trimmers had cut off the pig hindquarters. I took the buckets to the front of the room and emptied them into boxes, which I then weighed and sealed up. When I was needed again, the supervisor would yell "fat man," and I would do it over again. I was a little overweight at the time. Story 28, worked at a pizza place making below minimum wage, doing all the work and never once got a pay stub. Management never worked and blamed everything on the busboys. Story 29, I worked at a used car lot for about a month, my first summer home from college. Paid decent and under the table. The summer 2001, I was getting paid 15 hours, which was awesome for a college kid looking to save up for beer money in the fall. I was the lot boy and prepped the cars that were sold, charged up the batteries on the ones that had been sitting for a while, and picked up lunch for the sales team. Overall, wasn't bad, but the work was tedious in the sun, and the people that I worked with were an odd sort sales guy. When he wasn't selling used cars, he was a bouncer door guy at a third-rate strip club. He would borrow our high-end SUVs to drive escorts on the weekends without the boss knowing. He would have me put dealer plates on them after the owner left on Saturday afternoons. Sales guy too, this was peak rap rock era, and dressed and acted like a Fred Durst clone, bragged about how he had multiple girlfriends and would make them bring him food at alternating times. One afternoon, the lunch schedule got crossed, and we had a trashy girl fight that would have been successful to our public freakout. Office manager, former girlfriend of sales guy to one sales guy too, who retired from dancing to go straight. She still escorted on the weekends though, processed finance applications, and did the cash drops at the bank. Owner paid everything in cash, and specialized in selling cars for Jewish below 10K. Every Friday, we had a customer who would come in and co-sign on a shitty Nissan Altima with 80K on it and would pay in cash, always from New York or North Jersey. I just assumed they were engaging in narcotics or human trafficking. Mechanic, quiet guy, kept to himself, and would listen to classic rock all day. After about a week, he told me he was happy for the job as he had been away for a while. He was good about showing me how to work on engines, and we would hang out in the garage drinking Miller High Life out of paper cups. Dude, loved Steely Dan. After about a month, I noped right out of there. While the pay was good, the ongoing drama of the people I worked with wasn't enough to hang around. Sales guy, too, had just gotten arrested on the lot for failing to pay child support, and I knew I was just a few days away of being guilty by association of something. Story 30, I took a job with a marketing company working at the mall trying to get people to take surveys. Literally hundreds of people walked right by, refusing to make eye contact with me. It was like being a ghost. Horrible job. Hated every second of it. I quit after 6 hours. Story 31, worked at a call center in the 2012 election. Basically, my job was to call people and try to get them to vote for Obama during dinner time in Kansas. Story 32, I worked at a Culver's 3 to 4 years ago. So many shitty things, but here are a few of the worst. We had a senior discount. There was tons of old people, particularly between 12 to 2 p.m. It was insanely busy. If you forgot to add their senior discount, even if it didn't ask for it, you'd get yelled at and berated over literally 30 cents. We had basket meals and snack pack meals. Baskets were larger meals and obviously more expensive. People would constantly order baskets, give me their money, and then after I cashed them out, they would get pissed that I put in the basket because that was too much to eat. Then I would have to refund them and get a manager and all of that. So they were pissed they had to wait on top of everything else. I was also in high school and had to get up early, and my shitty manager would force me to stay until 11 when I was only scheduled until 10. She would talk about me to the other high schoolers, saying how lazy I was because I wouldn't stay and help, even though I had to go home and do homework plus showering and getting ready for school the next day. One time, one of the idiot high school boys mopped with a dirty mop, and she told me to remop the floor while the kid was still standing there. She actually expected me to do it when he was the one who up. Anyway, sorry for the giant wall. I just really hated that job. Story 33, delivering ice in West Texas, eastern New Mexico. I was making 25 hours and working upwards of 70 hertz a week. I was a helper and basically lumped ice bags all day in the middle of what amounts to be a barren desert. My hands were absolutely destroyed from being wet, cold, hot, dry. The ice bags had a metal tie at the end that would shred through my fingers. That job is what motivated me to go back to school. Story 34, I once worked for a candle factory. Everyone was on meth, and the smells were extremely overwhelming. I doubt anyone will see this comment. So, I don't want to type out a bunch of stories and them not be seen, but if there is some interest, I would share. Story 35, media play. I would say RIP, they all closed, but I'm glad they're gone. I was seasonal, and at the end of the Christmas season, they gave up. For those that don't know, media play was like the Walmart or Best Buy. My day consisted of walking up and down aisles, pushing the slumping DVDs straight up. Our system was horribly inaccurate. So when people called and asked if we had something, I told them no most of the time, which was untrue. A girl coworker once told on me for being near the customer service desk for too long. My argument was I hate when I'm looking for a representative and can't find one. They didn't care. They also always scheduled me just short of the time that would require ID, given any kind of break. I was also scolded once for using the bathroom. That place, Rada Media Play. I was a kennel tech for the Humane Society, and the job details were as follows: be in at 4 a.m. to hose down and disinfect the kennels of their accidents. Walk the pups daily, feed them daily, quarantine the sick ones with kennel cough, wear a chainmail sleeve, glove, and neck cover for corralling feral cats. Apply a muzzle to pit bulls brought in through the sheriff to be put down. Try not to cry when a dog or cat is hit by a car to carry them to operation or gurney them in. Try not to cry, hold them as they're euthanized. Try not to cry, carry their still warm body to the peaceful-looking bed to show their owners. Try not to cry, carry their occasionally howling body to the incinerator. Cry like a flip the switch. This is a no-kill shelter too. Story 36, I've posted this before, but it's up there as one of the worst I did. I worked on a Croissant Line. You can bet they never came out of the machine with that nice curved shape. Nope. They're straight, but someone has to bend them into shape. Thousands of them every day on a moving line. This equates to the most depressing job in the world. TLDR. I bent croissants for a living at it, am humbled by everyone's interest and concern. I shed the croissant shackles a long time ago. I guess it's one of those jobs you have to do to make you what you are today.